first reader will be Tennison S. Black. This is really a brilliant debut, Survival Strategies. I don't know if you can see the cover from where you're sitting. Check it out when you get a chance, but this cover was painted by Tennyson's daughter, and we have here a road runner and a rattlesnake. Now the book is set in Yuma, Arizona, which the poems tell us is the sunniest place in the world, and also the driest and the hottest. And survival, the roadrunner here tempts the rattlesnake to strike and then grabs its head and thrashes it to death. It's tough, it's hard, it's a cruel desert, and the story told is the speaker is the daughter of a woman who marries a cowboy who seems to me a mean son of a you-know-what. And so survival, the speaker has to learn to survive. The mother has, there's an extended prose poem that lays out family and generations and a whole story of survival and a kind of I don't know, it's a thriving, but a way to come through. And the voice of this book is a memorable voice. I think of Holden Caulfield. This is a very different voice, but it's analogous in the way you will hear what a gripping, brilliant, powerful voice this really is.
Yeah, thank you for your deep reading of my work, Richard. I'm touched. Thank you so much. And thank you, Joyce and Poetry Flash, for having me out, having all of us out. And thank you also to Louise for putting me up, and Cynthia for inviting me in the first place. So the last time I lived nearby in the 90s, and then my kids got a little older and I was traveling around, and I was driving this giant RV with just my kids. I was a single mom. And I was like, we were going from somewhere in the Northwest, and we were going down to do some shows down south. And I said, Liz, I gotta take you to San Francisco. And so here I am driving this RV, it's towing a Suburban, a giant Suburban. And we go down Lombard, and I'm like, I'm gonna take you to City Lights, obviously, right? I'm a writer, so I gotta take you to City Lights, and I'm telling them about the beats, and we're talking, and I'm driving down Lombard in this Suburban, towing this RV, towing a Suburban. I turn right on Columbus, and the awning of my RV starts to unfurl as I'm driving along. So this is my last memory of San Francisco, and I'm glad that the drive today, thanks to Jim, went a lot better. A lot better. It was much smoother. So as Richard said, my work is largely about growing up in Yuma, Arizona, which is the literal sunniest place on earth, with my father, who was a cowboy and was very often called a mean son of a bee. That was basically his second name, so that was good intuition there. And my mother, and after I was going to grad school, I got a really good package to go to ASU, of course, and so I went to ASU to study with Cynthia. And but when I was going back, I just, going back to the location of your trauma is really challenging and really difficult. And I went back, and shortly after I got there, I wrote this. Here I am. In the sage, blowing smoke, the creosote's whisper won't ask where I've been, won't have missed me. But I'm older now and don't care, not because I really don't care, but because care is more than I can do in this body right now. Which place misses a person anyway? We are the sad who go looking for happy instead of growing it. We are the loneliness of air before it is breathed, the want to be absorbed into something, to dissolve, be absolved. Creosote doesn't ask me where I've been, but picks up like I wasn't gone, says, Javelina's been at my roots again. Deserts don't miss people when they leave. So when I was going back, I mean, I live in the Northwest now. I live north of Seattle, and so I love the rain, obviously, and settled there because I feel comfortable and I feel happy up there in the rain. But here I was going back to Arizona, and I knew that I was going to work on this project, but also I kind of knew I was going to suffer along the way, and I was really struggling with that idea and the concept. So that is where the first poem of the book was born. And it's, I was born for rainy days, but I was born in the Sonoran, and I keep thinking she's missing me. If a desert can miss, it does miss me. It has to. Meaning I need it to, because what am I otherwise? If everything I leave or that has left me doesn't miss me, then over here at Invisible O'Clock, I still want to feel comfortable being called a visible woman, being called by a name, being seen, but I don't. I am the thing who can't forget that Arizona has been trying to kill me since I was born into it. But even if it hates me, I still get these urges for the touch of the dirt I left in a huff some 40 odd years ago. And suddenly I'm all, please take me back. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. You're beautiful, AZ. Because I never thought it was beautiful in the Sonoran until I'd been away for decades. Until I grew up and got away enough to look backward at it. Like the way I look at pictures of my 20s and remember how gross I felt. How awkward, all angles and elbows, stick out ribs and buck teeth, how unwanted. But now I realize I was always lovely in the soft skin of youth. And I'm sad for young me, for whom the word woman was a wound infected by the cowboy gaze. When I left, I told the scrub, the sand, and scorpions, saguaro, and especially the cowboys. I told everyone. Except the painted ponies, the birds, the jackrabbits, everyone but the red-threaded, iron-rich rocks and the women who held my hands whenever they found me lost, which was often. I told all of the rest of it except that which is too precious to let go of, that they were unwanted, and I threw hate at them in darts and daggers. I hated at all of it. The sounds and smells, the scratchy way of living I was born into. I waved up an exorcism of my origin, of the destructive, violent invasion of cowboy culture. But I'm going back anyway, because I left something of me in the desert. Because you can't imagine the glory of a jackrabbit on the run at full tilt, fleeing a dusk-fired coyote until you've seen it. And you can't know yourself until you know who you're rooting for. So it's true, my daughter did make this cover, and I feel so blessed by it. But the reason that I had her make it, so I hated Arizona, but the reason that I was able to sort of open up into the project in the first place was because my grandmother had left me a tiny silver pendant of a roadrunner. And I had a fellowship and went back to Yuma, and I was sort of exploring around there, and you might not believe me, but I don't really fit in Yuma. And so I'm walking around Yuma, and I'm wearing my grandmother's pendant, and I start to realize that I can't name anything. I mean, if I walk around my home, I can tell you the name of every plant around my home, and predominantly in the region where I live today, but I couldn't tell you the first thing about the flora and the fauna in the region where I was born. And so I started there. I started looking up, well, tell me about the roadrunner. and I started looking up a little bit about the roadrunner, which led me to the rattlesnake, which led me to understanding javelina, which led me to understanding creosote, and I began to learn the names of the flora and fauna, and slowly I started to realize it wasn't the desert that I hated in the first place. It was the cowboys, it was that culture, it was those people who were cruel and mean to not just me, but a lot of people. And so it was coming through that to learn to love the desert that set me free from my pain. And so there are 2 survival strategies poems in the book. I'll share one. This is the first one, Survival Strategies 1, which is totally unique. When the rains don't come, and they won't, because Yuma is the sunniest place on earth, which sounds great in the abstract, like a sunburned Anaheim theme park, but Ocotillos shed their leaves to preserve energy. Spadefoot toads estivate so they don't die. That is, they sleep for 9 months of the year. Little girls who like animals more than people narrate the silica carved stories into their skin with cactus tines, but also shade beetles with cupped hands while they cross roadways and fall in love with rabbits to stay alive. Kangaroo rats never need drink a drop. They receive all they will ever need from eating leaves. To conserve energy, roadrunners run in lieu of flight. Bobcats hunt dust devils for practice when they're starving. And when food is scarce, river toads have a patch on their bellies that will hydrate them as they sit in the tiny gatherings of moisture. Because Yuma receives just 85 millimeters of rain per year, less than 3 paper clips long. Little girls talk to Joya. Are you lonely because no one loves you? Asks Kestrel, will you fly me to my mama? And cry an ocean from missing one. One of the primary reasons I really wanted to write this book wasn't for me. It was because I felt like I needed to tell my mother's story. Because everybody told my father's story. He was kind of notorious in the region. Everybody knew him. They still do. Everybody knew my grandfather, who also wasn't always so kind. But my mother and my grandmother, they didn't get their stories told, as is so often the case in our culture. And so throughout, I tried very hard to do my best by my mother, and that's why she gets the prose section, which was to give her more weight in the work. And this is, mamas, don't make your daughters with cowboys. Is it okay to swear here? I gotta ask.
Yeah.
All right, I'll just say F-bomb. That's fine.
Yeah.
After we would bring in the alfalfa, they often threw a party for the ranch hands. So, buckets of green-brown water get tossed on the creosote by cowboys with shirt sleeves and a skull roll just for the smell. Tin buckets drawn dripping from horse troughs make toss water for the smell of a liar's rain. The scent of desert rain comes from the creosote's lying leaves. It's not rain, but it smells like it. Rain won't come here. Won't because it's too dry to waste itself. Why throw down on scrub in a 3-minute evaporation? It won't come because it's run off north looking for a better reception than cowboys. Cowboys pace at the scent of pork in the pit with yellow Coors cans in the hand that isn't tossing horseshoes. Someone's against the backside of the barn. Smoke and a liar's rain, garlic and singed hog hair. At the hog pit, skeeters hump blood from sun-worn bodies, ripped bodies, strapped, stout, and spattered with old-timer scars. Skin stretched thin over muscle, made from sheep shearing and baling hay, arms made for the rodeo ring, arms made for hunting, for butchery, arms that wrangle, arms that toss little girls like dead pigs, but not in the air, but not in the pit. Catch them once a year by the braids and slap them for telling a boy no. Arms that point and tell little girls to fetch yellow cans from the cooler with a pat on the backside. Go on now, scoot. Tell them they look pretty and ignore their struggle like the rest of the livestock. So I'll read one more from the book. I think. Yeah, I'll read one more from the book and then I'll close with something new. This is also for my mom, and I couldn't title it. I just couldn't. And so I read it to my daughter, the same one who did the cover, and says she can't write. And I finished it and she goes, "Even heroes have to die." There's my title. Got it. Thank you. So with great thanks to my daughter, again, even heroes have to die. And it has an epigraph which says, 19, yes, the 19th will do, which were my mother's last words, spoken as she was dreaming, and she did actually die on the 19th of December. Even heroes have to die. And so mine did. Holding my hand as the sun came up, she was a tempest. An alluvial slope who looked west and went. She did not wait or even wait for me, but rushed out for the ocean, which can't be right because she couldn't swim. But looking west, she breathed until she did not, and smiled a little into the last exhale. I held on to her with my left hand, and the clammy hands of my own daughters with my right. An eruption of tear-stained seeds sprang from my cracked open chest and soaked my mother's hair. Why not leave in the night? Why wait for morning? Was it that she was dreaming? But the woman who rose at sunrise every day of her life did so then, and I cried until I dried out, drank the sea and cried again. From 29 to 39, I cried. And from 39 to 45, I cried, and 45 on. I washed some of her ashes into the sea, tasted some of their salt on my tongue in the wind, and cried because that's the doing of it. I worked and raised my children and fell in love with a yellow lab, crying still. I ordered in restaurants and cried, walked crying, drove crying, and I danced, and every time I thought of her, I cried. But mothers are always moving, always saying goodbye. Walking away as they leave you in school is practice for taking their harvest of stones and stories with them when they go. Stretching out, pulled in every sense, elongating the people who love them. They're a walking helicopter game when it goes faster and faster, and their whole body reaches out to hold on and let go at the same time. They are the pull of being the last one left in the car, of being the last one breathing in a hospital room, such that the entire queue steps up one spot, and we are pulled into our place in line by the impossible stretch of holding on to the hands of our children and the hands of our mothers while watching the latter die. Hey, I didn't cry. Y'all saw that. I want credit for that. So I'm working on my second collection, and it's mostly about promiscuity, so I won't read a lot of it here. But I'll read a couple. This is Father Figure. They're all titled with 80s songs, so I have 80s babies in the room. I hope so. There's a few. So this is Father Figure. How can we blame our mothers for drinking? Like we've never met the men they wed? The men they asked for everything, only to be denied while they stood in sagging whites, the butter beans of aisle 6. I wonder if my mother would laugh that I taught my children to hiss and growl like a demon when strange men tried to talk to them. But then I recall the satanic panic of the 80s and how she wouldn't let me play D&D even though she wasn't Christian. Such is the power of the zeitgeist, the fears we share with each other, the ways we mirror erosion until we wake up in curlers with a gin and tonic, our daily prayer. All right, last one. This is Master of Puppets. She's fallen out of the sky to my lawn, down and down without crying out. Everyone said I was never hers anyway. The dark ball became my hands. My eyes wandered like fireflies in the heat of a gone dark night. without a moon to light the yard. It's good that I left her there crying. It's good, okay? She'll thank me, I told her. Even I don't want to see my face tomorrow. But for a while, I tasted the clouds on her salty cheeks, held the moon for her to see, and I saw the woman I don't have the guts to be.
Okay, Tennison. Our next reader is Cynthia Hogue. Instead, it is dark. And this is her 10th poetry book. It's astounding. And there are a number of other books that she edited and translated. On the table is Distantly by Nicole Bouchard, which is co-translated by Cynthia and her husband. And this book begins, the notes tell us, when her husband, Sylvain Gallais, had a massive heart attack, and she visited him in the intensive care unit, and he told her of a dream that he had had. And the dream, the book, involves going to where Sylvain grew up and exploring the dreams and the memory of the Second World War, of the burned villages. And this book traces in elliptical manner, it traces those memories and the trauma of war through some 70 years to right here now, where we experience our own traumas. So this is a book of war and memory and what it does to us, how we experience these traumas. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Richard and Joyce. And is this good? I'll just say it's fantastic to be here. Thank you. I know many of you sacrificed a football game. Since Sylvain was traveling with me, I thought we would open with a few poems from Distantly. Nicole Bouchard is a great Québécoise poet. She has been at the forefront of the feminist, queer, and Québécois liberation movements since the 1960s. And she's been very honored in her life, but she just won the grand prize for poetry from La Maison de la Poésie in Paris. So, okay. Distantly is a series of poems about cities.
Okay. This is going to be in French. Villes suspendues au-dessus des heures, avec leurs paupières de renaissance, leurs ficelles pour guérir, repoussant le chien, le singe dans les musées, frôlant paumes et poings pour camoufler l'odeur de peur, l'instinct quotidien.
Cities suspended above the hours with their Renaissance eyelids, their secrets for healing, pushing the dog, the monkey into museums, brushing palm and fist to cover the odor of fear, the daily instinct.
Au loin, Prague, le pont, le château, l'heure dans l'horloge dans l'histoire, le cimetière juif au tournant, Skopje, Istanbul et autres alphabets, commerce d'heures et d'épices comme rivière rouge, safran, pulsant dans le temps.
In the distance, Prague, the bridge, the castle, the time on the clock tower in history, the Jewish cemetery at the corner, Skopje, Istanbul, other alphabets, commerce of hours and spices like a river, red saffron pulsing with time.
Ville avec leur fou de Dieu. Cette fois-ci, je compte les mains, les pieds, les langues, les tuniques, les cailloux, les têtes, les barbes, les calottes, les voiles, les châles. Je ne compte pas les vertiges, les ablutions, les miracles, les coups de fouet. Dans les haut-parleurs, des dizaines de crachats de mots. Un feu si grand qu'il faut de l'eau sur le front et les pieds. Je compte les yeux, les doigts, je compte jusqu'à la poussière, je compte jusqu'à l'enfance.
Cities with their fools for God. This time I count the hands, the feet, the tongues, the tunics, the pebbles, the heads, the beards, the skull caps, the veils, the scarves. I do not count the vertigos, the ablutions, the miracles, the whiplashes. In the loudspeakers, the dozens of spat out words. Such a big fire that water must be splashed on brow, on feet. I count the eyes. I count the fingers. I count until the dust. I count until childhood.
Ville avec leurs huîtres. Celle aux joues, j'aime cette saveur de matière intime qui nourrit les pensées, vin, épaules nues des nuits d'été. À Sète, à Sige et dans toute la vallée de Memramcook, la tête en amont du silence, je sais m'imprégner de l'huître et de son sel de clair.
Oh, thank you.
That's okay, we can move.
Cities with their oysters. Salt on my lips. I love the savor of intimate matter that nourishes thought, wine, the naked shoulders of summer nights, in Sète, in Sige, and the whole valley of Memramcook, my head upstream of silence. I know how to relish the oyster and its salt, fresh clair.
Ville, réellement. Quand le froid taille dans les arbres de petites agglomérations de sens, si tu apprends à toucher facilement l'épaule de quelqu'un pour changer l'avenir, touche.
Cities, really. When the cold carves in the trees small agglomerations of meaning. If you learn how to touch someone's shoulder easily, to change the future, touch.
Ville avec mon visage qui revient. Ville avec espoir dans la mire des sanglots. Pensons-nous que l'aube est un mot? Ou avons-nous dit par erreur Tengo Sueño? Ce matin-là, dans une ville d'Amérique, sourire, sève. Au-delà de tous les calendriers, je respire lentement. Une vie de mots fresques. Femme, lovée dans une joie d'errance et d'infini.
Cities where my face returns. Cities with hope in the crosshairs of sobs. Do we think that dawn is a word? Or have we said by accident, tengo sueño? This very morning, in a city in Amerika, to smile sat beyond all schedules, I breathed slowly, a life of frescoed words, women wrapped in the joy of wandering and infinity.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll read a few poems from Instead It Is Dark. Richard told you some of the story. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Actually, Sylvain had told me this dream that he'd had as a child, growing up in post-war France, under circumstances of great general deprivation. So the dream was a recurring dream that he told me, and really after his heart attack while he was still in the ICU, I went home and I wrote this first poem that I'm going to read you, but I didn't realize that I actually had been listening to him all those years. So I ended up interviewing his extended family, those who were alive during the war, because I've been obsessed with the experience of civilians during wartime. And unfortunately, we are always invited to think of those. So, after the war, there was no food. As a boy, the man dreamed he lay in a box of mineral salts, ruby, amber, quartz clear. He imagined eating the raw meat of the goat whose milk he sucked as newborn. Death was his mother, match thin and unsmiling. He loved her fiercely, voraciously bleating into her sad face as he nursed. Starving, the boy grew tall, but not straight. Lately, the man returned to the Forêt de Chinon, which did not comfort him. So many trees harvested, he lost his way. Hunger was all he'd known when, a long time ago, he pleaded for Death, his mother, to feed him. He bent to touch himself because, after all, Death would not. And I'll read a couple of poems that came out of interviews with the extended family. The daughter is in the voice of actually the mother-in-law, but I was shocked to learn she had been in Free France. And she told me at the age of 77 that she had never not for one day been anxious and traumatized by what happened. France, 1942. I witnessed nothing to speak of because we were free. My life at 4 was the same as at 3. Then whispers wound into my ears, or Father never whispered. He gave me fire to breathe. All the oxygen lit the room, burning me up until my breath writhed in the body's drum. Nothing changed but my mind. I had the sense of him having said to Mother, a soldier, something, but recall none of the words, only a sentence ending susurrus in a hiss, and I froze. Put together, the words were menacing, sneak attacks after which fear riddled me day and night like bullets. I have never not lived with the fact of having heard. The tear in me trauma rent when I secreted 0 at the bone. Father was high up. I never got his echelon straight before the war was over. but he was someone who knew things done to whom by whom, and when I snuck to the door to listen, the sound words made was lightning flashed right into my skull. The cousin. Flight. Years later, the once child would recount almost casually how many experiments the enemy performed on the angel, whom she called father, when the angel was a POW. Because he was fallen, they cut him without anesthesia to see if it hurt. They removed an insignificant organ, then a significant one, to see if the etheric angel body could heal itself. They debated removing his wings. Some of them wanted to make him fly first, but they feared he'd escape. One came to him in pain, seeking absolution. My soul to keep, the man whispered furtively, but also a bit frantically. Fate's upon us, he cried. The angel found language, fled. The once child had told the story many times of her father's return, how he'd been arrested a soldier but returned an angel, silent and scarred. How then the angel had left the once child's mother, and how poor they were. The once child hadn't mentioned the father had been tortured until the cousin's meal, as if silence erased trauma, and the angel always gone for good. After the war, there was another war. The man's cousin, 6 years older when drafted to Algeria, saw things, they said, the war being fought by men with gloves off. How history's trace resides in a country's language. 50 years later, the cousin gasping for breath, the man understood that all the white wine, harsh and constant cigarettes were also a language, that his cousin's otherworldly laughter welled from an ancient memory of having once belly laughed. Like riding a bike, they said. Time heals nothing. Defeated, the colonizers created for their children a doctored history. When conscripted, the man whiled his time, cleaning the rifle he still keeps in the upper closet, oiled and ready. And I'm going to read you one poem that's from contemporary times. The Loire Valley at Solstice, 2015. How the land heals. The uncoursed sun, a vulnerable evening's chords, a fallow field. The mounded rows you think at first are graves, which we traverse to reach the 1,000-year-old fortified grange. Somehow it missed the war, though everything near the railroad's gone to bits. Nothing in this place to fix or modernize. No one to claim it. Someone's vision was to fill the vaulting barn once a year with music, around now. Silence opens wooden gates made from the primeval forest cleared to farm. The pockmarked limestone walls enclose a cluttered courtyard, in the middle of which humans mill, perusing CDs, having drinks among the cattle stalls. Inside is Bach, and tonight an owl whose contrapuntal hoots you hear before you see him, land high in the rafters, just like your dream of flying. At midnight, sun dipped down at last. The full moon floodlights the watchtower. The gates closing, we're cast out to the carless field, nor other farmstead near to dim the sense of not belonging here. And because this book owes its existence to Sylvain, I'll close with a short love poem. Then became. Smog dust lusters into wing gift with you. This glistening fractal, the actual pattern of love, our granted and fragile bower in which greenly are ones bestowed. Thank you.
Our third reader is Louise Nayer, and she will bring us literally home. This book has a primal scene. In Freud, the primal scene is sexual, as everything in Freud is sexual. But in this book, the primal scene is pain, trauma. The speaker's parents go down into the basement of a summer home in Cape Cod to light the heater, and there's gas. Gas has escaped. There's an explosion, and they're terribly burned. The father, not as badly. The mother has to undergo more than 30 operations to graft skin, and her face is not a normal face. It never becomes so. Now this is a complex book. A lot's going on. There's loves and travels, escapes, narrow escapes. Narrow escapes is the title. There are escapes from rape in Morocco, but the big story is Louise becoming a poet. And the book is told with song lyrics, poems, including some of Louise's own. And she comes across country, so here we all are. And her parents eventually come across country too from New York. So it's a story of a poet, a poet's becoming. So let's welcome her, Louise Nayer.
Shrunk. Thank you to Joyce and to Richard. What an amazing introduction. Yeah. And to all of you for coming out today. Thank you so much. So I am going to read from a few sections of Narrow Escapes. And also I want to say I'm so honored to read with Tennison and Cynthia. It's just, Cynthia's an old friend from grad school. And so it's just been a great homecoming. And I guess that's what Richard was talking about. I never thought I'd stay in California, but here I am. We're all here. So I'm going to start with the beginning of the book. And as Richard was saying, it's really, it's a journey through a lot. There's definitely pain and trauma and also adventure, and the late 60s, early 70s, the cusp of so many changes in the world. Not to say that there aren't lots of changes now, but it was also a very exciting time. So it starts with a poem from Frank O'Hara, part of a poem. I wanted to be sure to reach you, though my ship was on the way, it got caught in some moorings. I am always tying up and then deciding to depart. Frank O'Hara. So it's about trying to find home. I came close to death in Marrakesh. My traveling companion, Jacqueline, went out shopping while I lay on my bunk, weak and sick, hallucinating red and yellow colors that danced and fluttered across the pea green walls at the youth hostel. Had I known this would happen, I might never have gone on this journey when school ended. But hindsight is 2020. I was young. It was 1969. A global youth peace movement swept the world. Hundreds of thousands of mostly middle-class kids, thumbs out on the endless highways of the world, entering and leaving countries they knew little about. All people are good, I wanted to believe, like my heroine, Anne Frank, even as bombs dropped fire on villages in Vietnam. Be careful, don't be silly. Keep your traveler's check and passport in your money belt, my mother said to me on the deck of the student ship, the Aurelia, before I left for France on my junior year abroad. My mother was a practical, no-nonsense woman who always had her ducks in a row. That July morning, only a few days before the moon landing in 1969, she wore a pressed khaki skirt, white silk shirt, and navy blue blazer. The daughter of a Presbyterian minister who adopted her at 9 after her biological father ran off, and a religious mother, she had pulled herself up with a master's degree in nursing education from Columbia University, unusual for a woman of her time. In 1942, she married my father, a Jewish doctor with Ivy League credentials. We had a beautiful home in Greenwich Village. My mother's impeccable dockside attire was in sharp contrast to my peasant blouse and ragged jeans, too tight for my thighs. I had gained 20 pounds drinking beer in the Yakima Valley, Washington, where I worked that summer with the American Friends, a Quaker organization helping in a migrant community. I almost dropped out of school and stayed in Washington, pulled like so many others towards community work. Plus, I had a love affair with Mateo, a lawyer and spokesperson for the migrant community. I left the Yakima Valley with the heaviness of my heart, desperately alone, traveling through 3 time zones, Seattle to New York City to France. I found real work here. I'm dropping out of college, I wrote to my parents 2 weeks earlier. But I tore up the letter. It was scary to drop out of college, to defy my accomplished parents. I got stoned with some legal aid workers in Seattle who drove me to the airport late. I missed my flight. But I dutifully boarded the next flight and slept through the landing and takeoff in Chicago, groggy with leaving a place I loved and scared to go on the next journey. 5 days later, I stood on the deck of a huge ship that left for France. On the deck, my mother handed me a big floppy doll with brown braids and a pink flowered pinafore. From that New England catalog, she said, looking at me and hoping I would accept her gift, even though I was too old for a doll. I turned away for a minute, aware of her scars and the smell of heavy cosmetics. Blobs of flesh like silly putty covered her face below her eyes and down her neck. You could see a thin line where flesh from her stomach was sewn on, and a crisscross line like a jagged stitch on her neck flesh. Her eyebrows were drawn on with pencils, and her right eye was slightly bigger than the other. Her perfect outfits couldn't hide her reconstructed face. An explosion in the dank cellar of a summer rental. I was 4 years old. My mother's hands and face were blackened with burns. No hot water to wash my face, my mother said to my dad when they got home. He held the flashlight as they climbed down the rickety ladder in the musty cellar to light the pilot light. Gas with no smell had escaped. My mother lit the match. Blue flames ravaged her face and hands. My father, too. My mother's face would be unrecognizable. They narrowly escaped the fire. Earlier that evening, they had passed the gasmen on the road and waved at them, 2 ordinary cars passing in twilight. My last memory before she lost her face, my mother kissing me goodbye, a lavender shawl swept over her shoulders, the scent of rose perfume, her shining eyes. A few minutes later, our fate was sealed. Our babysitter, Della, let the men in to change the propane tank, a faulty valve, 9 months of separation, a perfect storm of grief. Now, on the broad deck of the enormous student ship, my mother's smell was thick from cosmetics, covered over by Chanel perfume. I stared back at the strangers on deck who looked at her too long. My mother is not a freak, I wanted to shout to the world. Thanks, Mommy. Even though I was 19, I still called her Mommy, as if I could be 4 years old forever. I clutched the doll to me, rubbing my face over the thick brown braids. My mother stayed until the last minute. No hugs, just a quick peck on the cheek. Her white patent purse slung over her shoulder, she walked briskly back onto the streets of Manhattan, away from the deep groaning sounds of the ship about to leave port. I wanted to run after her, to cling to her skirts and shout, "Mommy, don't go." I used to press my face against the window pane of our second-floor apartment, watching for her red coat coming back to me after one of her 37 operations. I tried to have faith that she'd always return, but I wasn't so sure. Now I was the one leaving. I took the steep steps down to my bunk, so low in the ship I didn't have a porthole. 3 days later, a morning newspaper slid under my door. Men had landed on the moon and planted an American flag on the luminescent sphere. In small print below all the fanfare about the moon landing, I saw a little boy had drowned in a stream full of reeds. Tears flooded my eyes. I felt so sad for him and his family. To die in the reeds when Amerika was celebrating the moon landing? Deep down, I lived in that chiaroscuro world, great joy shading to great grief. So it's kind of the beginning setup, and the next part is when I'm traveling in Morocco. And, part of the reason I think I wrote the book was I can't believe that I hitchhiked in Morocco. And I had quite amazing experiences, but this was one where I got sick. I wasn't supposed to eat salad, and I used to love the poem In the World of Mules, There Are No Rules by Ogden Nash. And this was one of these things I thought, I can have salad, no big deal. But I got very sick. So this is a narrow escape. Nayer, the doctor called out. My legs and hands quivered as I lifted myself out of the chair and walked with great hope into the doctor's office. I sat down on a chair. He looked haggard. His white coat hung loosely over a thin frame. He wore spectacles and looked down at me. I can't treat you, he said in English. Tears flooded my eyes. Why not? I need medicine. I'm very sick. Now my tears gushed down my face. I can't treat you, he said again, and then whisked me out of his office, coming close to pulling me up from the chair and physically throwing me out of the room. Look at all these people I need to see, my people. Look at all these people, go away. I could hardly talk as my friend Jacqueline and I descended the stairs. I was a middle-class girl from Amerika, a doctor's daughter. Why wasn't I at the European side of town near Jenny and Michael? So many poor Moroccans sat in that waiting room, many with sick children on their laps, waiting and waiting for their medicine, and then a rich American comes in and takes one of their spots. I wanted to think of myself as a poor student, but I wasn't. Now, too much time had elapsed to think, ruminate, cogitate, deliberate. You had to be deliberate to think, and I was losing that ability. Thoughts left my head and turned into blue, red, and yellow balloons that vanished in the sky. My parents could always wire me money, but I couldn't make that happen now. I was too sick, descending into hell, when the hot air of the street hit me. People went by walking too fast. Why wasn't Jacqueline taking me to the European side of town? Then I got back into the youth hostel. Jacqueline walked back with me, but now she was gone. I think she went shopping. I managed to climb to the top bunk, but my legs shook on each rung of the ladder. I wondered if my hands would hold me. I collapsed onto the thin mattress, smelling of my sickly, fetid, feverish sweat. A few words spun around and around, but it was a grinding sound I was hearing. My mind felt separated from itself, like puzzle pieces that don't fit, a round piece shoved into a square hole, all the edges ragged like a rip in my stocking. Put nail polish on the rip. I could hear my mother's voice, bossy, comforting. Don't throw them out. We've become too much of a throwaway society. I reached for my water bottle, thin, clear water, a bottle like a baby, but no one held me. I was in a tunnel of animal hides. I could hear drums like at the souk the night before. People came and went in and out of the room. No one noticed me. Then the room was empty. Even moving my arms was difficult. I saw my daddy standing in the doorway of my bedroom where I grew up, then heard him recite Shakespeare. Good night, sweet princess, let flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. But angels signified a darkness I didn't want to go through. I'm just 20, I thought to myself, just 2 decades, 2 sets of 10, 4 sets of fingers on my hand. Then I was Tinkerbell, the tiny fairy from Peter Pan who held a mirror near her lit by a lamp. She was always surrounded by light. In Peter Pan, when Tinkerbell's light was dying, all who loved her clapped for her, and her light returned like an epiphany. At first it flickered, then died, but then suddenly, like a heart that starts beating again, the light surrounded her and she could soar. My sister and I watched Peter Pan on TV and would clap and clap for Tinkerbell. How could such a sweet being die? Why did anyone die? I shivered and prayed I could keep some water in me. I lay still like a rock and tried not to move. Maybe if I stopped moving, I'd get better. My breaths were thready and shallow. I couldn't even say the words, help me. The dorm had emptied of people, only scattered knapsacks covering the 5 other bunk beds. Then I conjured up all the people who loved me, even my dead grandparents I'd never met, my Jewish grandparents on my dad's side who came from Vilnius and died before I was born, Lena, David, Uncle Philip. Such a loss when Uncle Philip died. And then the ones I knew in this life, Reverend Joseph and Fanny Daubert, my mother's parents, my mother's father who called me his little buttercup and bought me books about animals at the 8th Street bookstore, Mom, Dad, Annie, and then the names of best friends, Nancy, my next door neighbor, Ken. The light still flickered. Then I heard the door open. A tall woman entered, long red hair and blue eyes, like my Aunt Rusty, who cared for me when my parents were burned. Perhaps she rode here on wisps of Aunt Rusty's red hair. She put her things on her bed and then saw me. I lifted myself up for a minute and stared at her warm blue eyes. She plopped her stuff on a free bed, then came over to me. You're very, very sick. This is serious. I'm a nurse. Is it dysentery? She had an English accent. Yes, I said, my lips parched, slightly bloody, and so cracked that it hurt to talk. She rummaged in her purse and found charcoal tablets. These will stop the diarrhea, but you need fluids. Bowls of chicken soup and bottled water emerged from out of nowhere. For the first time in 3 nights, I didn't get up in the dark to use the bathroom. I rested all through the next day. The colors that had danced across the walls now turning white again. I took the charcoal tablets, slept for hours, and drank fluids. Little by little, my strength returned. My angel, my nurse, my miracle. So part of the book is also about luck and all these people who come to help you, which is why we're probably all here, because we probably all had narrow escapes in life. So then my journey goes back to New York City, and then I decide to come out to California on a total whim. I had studied with Robert Creeley, with Cynthia in Buffalo, and I just thought, I put everything in a 68 Camaro. I didn't really know how to drive very well, and I left by myself in a car with no air conditioning and no radio. So I'll just read a little of that section. On the road again, the black hood neatly over the radiator, protecting me, protecting the car, a new talisman of sorts. New York City, where my heart had started inside my mother's body and outside her body at New York Hospital, now faded away. The further I went with the change in time, the earlier it became, like being born again. What was freedom? Lack of restrictions. Out here on the road, no one was telling me what to do or what not to do. School, a boyfriend who would become a husband, a job, enough money, a place to live, a bank account, publications of my writing in the right magazines, the ones that would lead to bigger and better magazines, everything always bigger and better, as if life were to be one great crescendo, rising to some peak like Everest, where I would stake my claim, drape a big flag that I'd made it to the top. Voices swirled in my head at times, the shoulds of life. In the car, between places, the voices descended to a soft whisper. The time inside my Camaro was all my time. Crazy images spun through my brain, trees like dancers, the blue sky a silken road, the cars in front of me huge beetles, the road an alleyway to the heart. My heart not broken on this stretch of road. Maybe my heart had never really been broken when my parents disappeared. I wanted to believe that. I was always trying to get to an unbroken heart. These thoughts, Olympic runners of the air, like a spinning wheel or a player piano, went so fast I couldn't catch them, but I knew they were there and all mine. Thank you. Stop here.